Serving Amherst and Amherst Township, your hometown television station, Amherst City Cable.
July 8th, regular meeting of the Amherst City Council will come to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Van Schuren. Here. Mrs. Vasilk. Here. Mr. Winarski.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Janik.
Here.
Mr. Bukovac.
Here.
Mr. Goodell.
Here.
We'll stand for the prayer by Chaplain Vasilk and remain standing for the pledge of the flag by Sergeant Arms Bukovac.
You bow with me, please. Gracious God, we thank you for the gifts that allow us to serve our community. We thank you for the gift of caring so we can be charitable to others. We thank you for the gift of compassion so we can feel the feelings of others. And we thank you for the gift of patience so we can listen without judgment. We thank you for all these gifts, and now may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Move on to item 4, the consent agenda.
Minutes of the regular council meeting held May 26th, 2015. Minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held June 1st, 2015. Minutes of the Building and Lands Committee meeting held June 1st, 2015.
Mr. Miller.
Move to accept consent agenda as read.
Mr. Janik.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to accept the consent agenda as read. Are there any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Van Schuren.
Yes.
Mrs. Vasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Motion carries. Move on to item 5, acknowledgement of the public pertaining to items on tonight's agenda. Anyone wishing to speak on tonight's agenda? Not move on to item 6, ordinances and resolutions. First reading, item A.
An ordinance reappropriating funds in various accounts.
Mr. Miller.
Move to take 6A to the second reading.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to take item A to the second reading.
I request a suspension, non-emergency on this one.
Okay. Mr. Miller, would you like to change your...
Mr. President, I'd like to amend that to meet Auditor Kukuka's request of suspension of rules.
Mr. Goodell?
I will second that as well.
Thank you, sir. So motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules on item A so may be passed on the first reading. Any comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Van Schuren.
Yes.
Mrs. Vasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Motion carries. Mr. Van Kuren? Mr. Janik?
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Van Schuren.
Yes.
Mrs. Vasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Motion carries.
It'll be ordinance number O-15-16.
Thank you. Item B.
An ordinance to increase appropriations in Fund 810 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Miller.
We're going to take item 6B to, or actually it looks like we want an emergency here, correct?
Yes.
Do we want to suspend council rules as well?
Yes.
And pass it on the first reading?
Thank you. Mr. Janik.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules on item B so may be passed on the first reading. Are there any comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Van Schuren.
Yes.
Mrs. Vasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Motion carries. Mr. Janik.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Van Schuren.
Yes.
Mrs. Vasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Motion carries.
It'll be O-15-17.
Item C.
An ordinance vacating a portion of West Lake Drive and retaining a utility easement on a portion of the area vacated and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Goodell.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend council rules so item 6C may be passed on its first reading and declaring an emergency.
Thank you.
second it with a question, please.
Go ahead.
Just for the administration, there was 4 modifications that were to be included in this from the original offering. Are you happy with the revisions that are
Yes, we made all
here?
the changes that were brought up in the committee, and we submitted the new copies with the agenda requests.
Good, that's all I needed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a good question for administration as well. Whenever you're impacting a residential area, I always ask, is there any residents calling in regards to this, or has everybody been having?
None have called yet, but we have offered to talk to a couple of residents, take the prints down, show them what's being on, and if anybody calls, we'll be more than happy to make them available.
Very good. That's the least we can do. I appreciate it, and I have no further questions. Thank you.
Anyone else? This motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules. This may be passed on the emergency. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Motion carries. Mr. Miller?
Move to adopt.
Mr. Winarski?
I'll second that.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Motion carries. Move on to item. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Ordinance O-1518.
Thank you. Move on to item 7, ordinances and resolutions, second reading. There are none. Move on to item 8, ordinances and resolutions, third reading. Item A.
An ordinance authorizing the City of Amherst, Ohio to enter into an agreement with FiberTech Networks LLC for pole attachments of fiber optic cable and associated hardware.
Mr. Goodell.
I'll move to adopt.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Motion carries.
It's O-15-19.
Thank you. Move on to completes item 8. Move on item 9, miscellaneous acknowledgement of the public. Anyone here wishing to speak on any item? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is more for our residents out there. Summer hits, we have a lot of kids that are out in the streets playing, a lot of motorcyclists and cyclists in general that are out on the roadways. Please use caution, pay attention to the fact that you're going to see a lot of kids chasing a ball into the street, a lot of pedestrians and cyclists crossing. So if we could just keep an eye out for them, I think we'll have a safer, happier summer. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Anyone else? If not, move on to item 10, agenda requests and committee meeting schedules.
I have 3, Mr. President. The first is A-15-24 for police and fire, a resolution adopting the Lorraine County multi-jurisdictional natural hazard mitigation plan. The next is A-15-25 for finance, a resolution to extend the selling option by internet auction of municipally owned obsolete property valued at $1,000 or more pursuant to ORC 721.15D. And the final one is A-15-26, authorization to extend the selling option by internet auction of municipally owned obsolete property valued at $1,000 or more, and that's complete.
Thank you. Finance, Ms. Vasil?
Yes, I have 2 items, A15-25 and A15-26, as just read by the Clerk of Council. I would like to call that meeting for next Monday, the 15th at 7 o'clock, sir.
Thank you.
And that is complete.
Thank you. Building and lands, Mr. Winarski?
Nothing at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you. Streets, Mr. Bukovac?
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Community development, Mr. Janik?
No items, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Executive, Mr. Goodell?
Nothing at this time, Mr. President. Please cancel.
Thank you. Ordinance, Mr. Miller?
No items, please cancel, Mr. President.
Utilities, Mr. Miller?
Same, no items, please cancel.
Thank you. Recycle, Mr. Janik?
No items, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Technology, Mr. Bukovac?
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Police and fire, Mr. Van Kuren?
One item, A15-24, as read by the Clerk of Council. I'd like to call the meeting commence Monday, 7:15.
Thank you. That completes item 10. Item 11, reports administration.
Mr. Ramsey?
I can report that compared with last year, our income tax collection is up by a bit more than $150,000. So I want to take a minute to thank the citizens for their timely payments, and I want to thank the two gals that work real hard in my office and report.
Mr. Kukuka?
The May cash position report has been distributed and report.
Mr. Pecora?
No report, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Costello?
No report, thank you.
And a report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Move to accept reports of administration, please.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to accept the reports of administration. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Reports are accepted. Mr. Miller.
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned at 7:45.
Our town, our TV. Amherst City Cable.